So welcome to Academic Fraternity. In this lecture series, today I am going to present the series second lecture of plant taxonomy, and here I will explain the principles and the rules of international codes of the nomenclature of the plants. And before going to this particular issue, let me to take you to some basic issues in the plant taxonomy. As far as angiosperms are concerned, more than 4 lakh plant species are now being available in the nature, and the number is subjected to increase day to day due to explorations of the biodiversity across the globe. And these plants share some common features as far as their physiological point of view, fundamental structural aspects, cellular integrity, cell structures, tissue organizations, but they also differ to each other as far as their morphology with respect to its vegetative and reproductive stages. So, identification of the plants basically on the features of morphological point, and the classification basically done on these features whenever we make the difference between the two species or among a number of species under a single genus. And for holistic acceptability across the globe, some basic principles are required based on which the framework and the foundation of the plant nomenclature and its different aspects to be clarified among the academic fraternity and the different stakeholders who are associated with it. In this video lecture, I will try to give a bird's eye view about the history of International Code of the Nomenclature of Plants along with its present status to assess the global biodiversity. If you think about the ICN or ICBN, whatever you can say, then you will find that the nomenclature of the plant and its various aspects have been taken into account since the time memorials, specifically before the birth of the Christ, and Theophrastus, Aristotle, like great personalities, have tried their all efforts to assess the living organisms by their own vision. But all those visions were not true scientific because the scientific literature did not come into the limelight during that period. After the Renaissance in Europe and the development of science and technology in America, the thought of the germination of these particular domains had been expedited, and it was Carolus Linnaeus who proposed the elementary rules of the naming of plants in his publication Philosophia Botanica in 1737 and in 1751. So, Carolus Linnaeus to be taught as the father of this particular science. Then, in the very beginning of the 19th century, in 1813, A.P. de Candolle set forth a detailed rules regarding the plants nomenclatures in his epoch-making work, Theories Elementaria de Botanica. Following the same footprints, of his father, Alphonse de Candolle, the illustrious son of A.P. de Candolle, later evolved the present system of plant nomenclature, popularly called International Code of the Botanical Nomenclature. Then in 1867, Alphonse de Candolle, he first convened an international consortium in 1867 in Paris, and it was attended by number of botanists from several countries in Paris, and in presence of the vibrant academic presence of those scientists, a set of rules of plant nomenclature were adopted, and it was proposed by Alphonse de Candolle, and in the subsequent meetings of ICBN held in 1892 in Rochester, 1905 in Vienna, the foundations of the International Code of the Nomenclatures was laid down in Europe. On the other hand, in the other sides of Atlantic Ocean, the American peoples and scientists, they adopted a set of principles for themselves in 1907, and that is considered as the American Code. And obviously, between Europe and America, there is a confrontation, rather no holistic agreement did not came, but in 1930 Cambridge, both the counterparts, that means the European as well as the American views, consolidated in Cambridge in 1930, and truly speaking, it was the first international organizations or body who joined their efforts to lay the basic principles of nomenclatures of the plant to assess the biodiversity of the global flora. And I quote, Cambridge Code, for the first time in botanical history, a code of nomenclature came into being that was international in function as well as name. And this is called ICBN. And from 1930 and onwards, a number of international botanical congresses are being held in order to form and adopt different rules and recommendations that is to be applicable in plant taxonomy. You will find that in between 1915 to 1945, a huge gap was found to occur except in 1930 because of the two World Wars, First World War and Second World War. And you know, whenever any war takes place, it is very difficult to scientific community to come together and to have wide discussions to formulate in rules and regulations of any scientific thoughts or the principles during this global crisis. But after 1930 from Cambridge, the IBC then used to held at a certain interval, and in 1935 it first takes place in Amsterdam, followed by in 1950 in Stockholm in Sweden, in 1954 Paris in France, in 1959 Montreal in Canada, in 1964 Edinburgh in England, in 1969 Seattle in USA, in 1975 Leningrad in USSR, which is now Russia, 1981 Sydney, 1987 Berlin, and then in 1993 Tokyo in Japan, 1999, St. Louis in USA, 2005 of this 21st century in Vienna, Austria, 2011, Melbourne in Australia, 2017, Shenzhen, China, and 2024 from July 21 to 27, Madrid in Spain, 20th Botanical Congress. 20th Botanical Congress was held, and the aim and objective of all those Botanical Congress was to formulate certain rules, recommendations, and some articles, either its modifications or inclusions, to make the platform truly in holistic sense so as to the scientific fraternity can use these codes, recommendations, and regulations in worldwide to assess the global biodiversity. Now, if you think over that this Congress, the participants generally take part, they set some proposals to modify the code, and following a democratic pleasure and preference, the different decisions are taken into account like the other democratic systems, and the recommendations, rules, and its different kinds of modifications further being adopted for these particular sciences. Now, as far as the principles is concerned, you know that any country is governed by constitution, and this constitution is the mother for governing the different kinds of the body depending upon its nature. It may be autonomous organization, maybe any country, or maybe any institution. They set forth certain principles, and based on those principles, some rules, recommendations are taken into account from time to time for governing as well as assessing the different kind of the issues that comes during its administrations. So botanical science and taxonomy is not the only exceptions, and the international consortium, they adopted 6 basic principles based on which the rules and recommendations of the IBC has been adopted. These 6 principles are: number 1, the botanical nomenclature is independent of geological nomenclature, and the code applies equally to names of taxonomy group treated as plants, whether or not these groups are originally so treated. That means the life forms basically divided under 2 broad groups, plants and animals. So for animal there is another code that is called International Code of the Geological Nomenclature, and for plant, International Code of the Botanical Nomenclature, and for bacteria, though bacteria is also treated as well, there is a separate code that is called ICN, International Code of the Nomenclature of Bacteria. So botanical nomenclature is independent to geological nomenclature. So other nomenclatural issues that have been placed for assessing the other life forms. The second principle was applications of names of taxonomy group is determined by means of the nomenclatural type. Means whenever any names are to be taken into account, there must be a nomenclatural type. Means it's a separate issue. So nomenclatural type simply to say some elements of some specimens which are being used for naming that particular plants or something else, and there are different kind of the types like holotype, isotype, paratype, syntype that we will explore in the type concept. The third principle is the nomenclature of taxonomy group is based upon the priority of publication. It's a very common matter that any scientific research is may carried out at the same time on the different type based on any particular kind of the element, particularly the natural science. So the credit goes to those publications which will maintain the rules of the priority of the publications. The fourth principle, it's a very interesting one, that each taxonomy group with a particular circumscription, position, rank can bear only one correct name. That means if you want to see the taxonomic group, there you'll find that different kind of the hierarchy are used, like division followed by the order, class, family, so on, so on. So every taxa must have only one correct name. The fifth one, scientific names of taxonomy group are treated as Latin regardless of the derivation. That means any scientific name that will come into the domain of academic publications or anything else, that must be in the written Latin forms, Latin language. No other language will be accepted, neither for the naming of the plants, not for the diagnosis. So everything as far as the uh, nomenclature is concerned, that should be must Latinized. And the fifth, last but not least, the rules of the nomenclature are retroactive unless they are explicitly limited. That means there are certain limitations has been provided in this particular case. So these are the basic 6 principles based on which the international code of the nomenclatures is being set forth. And under these uh, international principles, there are number of recommendations have been taken into account under certain rules, and that was first accepted in 1983, where it has been stated, I quote, that the code are divided into rules set out in articles and recommendations. That means the principles are basically comprising of a number of rules, and the rules are followed by the articles, and articles it have some sorts of recommendations from time to time. And as mentioned under point number 4 of the preamble of 1983 ICN, the object of the rule is to put the nomenclature of the past into order and to provide that of the future names contrary to rules cannot be maintained. The rules of the recommendations ICN apply to all organisms treated as plants, whether fossil or non-fossil. So, as far as the living plants are concerned, or the plants who has already been extincted but they remain in the non-fossil forms, there the ICBN is to be applied, including fungi obviously. But as I have already mentioned that for bacteria, different set of the rules and different nomenclatural uh, regulations are also being implemented under the umbrella of ICNB, that is International Code of the Bacterial Nomenclature. And for the cultivated plants, because there are a lot of plants which are being either hybridized or anything else, and for cultivated plants which are having high economic value as far as the social demands, irrespective of its uh, uses, whether it is food or medicines or anything else. So separate codes are being formulated, which is called ICNCP, that means International Code of the Nomenclature of the Cultivated Plants. So altogether, there are altogether 5 uh, issue we can find: YCBN, ICNB, ICNCP, like this, and these are all used for these rules as far as the assessing of the different kind of the biodiversity. It may be animals, it may be plants, it may be bacteria, or it may be the different kind of the cultivated plants which have been used from time to times. Now, on the basis of the principles, there are certain rules that was already been told, and there are 14 to 15 rules that have been formulated by ICNB, ICBN, and these are say like ranks and endings of the taxa. What are the different kinds of the utilities will be used? That is very important. Then principles of the priority, then there will be a type method, then citation of the author, synonyms and related definitions, then some cultivated plants, Latin diagnosis, effective and valid publication, choice of names when the taxon ranking changed, choice of names when same rank taxa are united, retains of the names of the divided taxa, retains of the names of taxa in transference, injection of names, names of different. So these are the different kind of the issues that have been clearly demarcated under certain rules, that in how and in which way this kind of the problems related to this issue can be addressed, like say for example ranks of and endings of the taxa. Say for example family ACAE, like suffix are to be used to treat the family. For order ALES, say for an example ranales or Ranunculacea. So these are the principles being used by adopting certain suffixes for every particular taxa. A principle of priority that has already been told that when the issue of priority, the principles of the priority mentioned, then there are different kinds of types that I have already mentioned, like holotype, isotype, scene type, right? So different kind of the types have been explained. Then every scientific name must be accompanied with its author's name in abbreviated form. Say example, Mangifera indica L. So Mangifera indica is the scientific name of mango, but it has first proposed by Linnaeus. So the Linnaeus name must be followed by the scientific name. Then there are other lists of synonyms, related definitions. Then there are some provisions for the cultivation of cultivated plants. Then irrespective of the name nomenclature or the description of the plants, it must be Latin diagonized. Then any publication will be effective valid, that will not be simply to be done. There are some rules and regulations to make some publication to be effective and valid on the acknowledgement by the academic fraternity. So these are some of the rules that have been set forward by the ICVM as per its rules and the recommendations in this particular aspect. So last but not least, I can say that the plant taxonomy, its main object is to uh, identify the plants followed by its nomenclature, and in course of the nomenclature there are different kind of issues may come due to different kind of the reasons. So to address those issues and to overcome those challenges that come as per the taxonomy point of view, uh, the international body has set forth certain principles, and upon the basic principles, which is basically 6 basic principles have been laid down. Some rules and recommendations have been followed, and those rules and recommendations are to be used for solving the different kinds of taxonomy problems which may come time to time, and to make this science the most holistic one, so as to the people across the globe can easily access it and can carry forward the different kind of the academic and research activities based on those principles, rules and recommendations, and the sole authority and the credit, whatever you can say, goes to the International Code of the plant nomenclatures, and which has now been something changed, which is called International Code of the Nomenclature of Algae, Fungi, and Plant. And here the bacteria, there is separate code for animal, there is separate codes for cultivated plants, there are some separate codes, but as a whole, irrespective of their natures, these are nothing but certain principles and certain recommendations based on which the assessment of the biodiversity can be done, irrespective of the natures. And thus we can find that whenever any problems either in academic or in research come in this particular domains, the ICN of algae, fungi and plant can become, say, torch-bearer to explore the beauty of these particular domains, despite some darkness may found to occur in this beautiful natural science, especially if it is the domain of the assessment of the biodiversity, its naming, its documentations, and anything else. So I think you have understood this particular concept. In the next lecture, we'll come across another particular topic of plant taxonomy. So for listening this particular lecture, thank you very much, and hope you'll join the next lecture that will explore another particular topic in the next. Thank you very much for listening.